I'm sitting here at my kitchen table, holding my grandmother's jewelry box with trembling hands, and I can barely breathe. Yesterday, for the first time in 15 years, my mother-in-law hugged me. She called me daughter. She smiled at me like I was precious, like I mattered. But here's what's breaking my heart. It wasn't because she finally saw my worth. It was because she found out about the money. 15 years. 15 years of being told I wasn't good enough for her son. 15 years of family dinners where she'd look right through me, like I was invisible. 15 years of holidays where she'd introduce me as just the wife, while praising every other daughter-in-law in the family. I remember the first time she called me worthless. We'd been married 3 months and I'd brought homemade cookies to Sunday dinner. She took one bite, made a face, and said loud enough for everyone. I guess some people just don't have the gift of making things that matter. My husband laughed, actually laughed. That's when I knew I was alone in this family, but I tried. God, how I tried. I learned her favorite recipes, bought her thoughtful gifts, remembered every birthday and anniversary. When she was sick with pneumonia 2 years ago, I was the one who drove her to doctor appointments while her own son was too busy with work. She never said thank you, not once. Instead, she told people I was clingy, that I was desperate for attention. Last month, at my nephew's graduation party, she pulled me aside and said something that still echoes in my head. You know, dear, some women add value to a family. Others, well, they're just dead weight their husbands have to carry. I went home and cried for hours. My husband found me in our bedroom, mascara streaked down my face, and asked what was wrong. When I told him what his mother said, he just shrugged. She's old-fashioned, he said. She doesn't mean anything by it. But she did mean it. Every cutting comment, every dismissive look, every time she forgot to include me in family photos. She meant all of it. Then my grandmother passed away 3 weeks ago. I loved that woman more than my own mother. She raised me when my parents couldn't, taught me how to be strong, how to find worth in myself even when others couldn't see it. Her funeral was small, just close family, and I was devastated. My mother-in-law didn't even offer condolences. She complained the whole time about having to attend another sad event. But yesterday everything changed. I was cleaning out my grandmother's house when the lawyer called. Apparently, my grandmother had been much more successful with her investments than anyone knew. The house I thought was mortgaged to the hilt, paid off, worth $500,000. The stocks she mentioned casually, worth another $300,000. The jewelry box I'm holding right now, it contains pieces worth more than my husband makes in 2 years. She left it all to me, every single penny. I was still processing the news when my phone rang. It was my mother-in-law, which was strange because she never calls me directly. She always goes through my husband. Sweetheart, she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. I just heard about your inheritance. How wonderful for you, for the family. The family, like she'd ever considered me family before. I was thinking, she continued, maybe we should get together for lunch this week, just us girls. I feel like we haven't spent enough time together, and I want to fix that. I almost laughed. After 15 years of treating me like I was invisible, now she wanted girl time? But I said yes, I had to see this for myself. We met at that little cafe downtown, the one she'd always said was too fancy when I suggested it before. She was already there when I arrived, wearing her best dress, makeup perfect, smile plastered on her face like she was greeting royalty. She hugged me. This woman who hadn't voluntarily touched me in 15 years wrapped her arms around me and called me daughter. I've been thinking about how hard this must be for you, she said, patting my hand across the table. Losing your grandmother, inheriting all that responsibility. You shouldn't have to handle it alone. Responsibility, she meant money. I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, she continued, but family is family. And I want you to know that I'm here for you. We all are. She talked for an hour about family bonds and shared responsibilities, about how money should be used to lift up the whole family, not just one person, about investment opportunities and smart financial planning. Never once did she acknowledge the 15 years of cruelty. Never once did she apologize for making me feel worthless. She just smiled and planned how to spend my inheritance. I sat there, nodding and smiling back, watching this woman who'd made my life hell suddenly treat me like I was precious. And I realized something that made my blood run cold. She doesn't love me now. She loves my bank account. The same woman who called me dead weight last month was now calling me daughter. The same woman who said I didn't add value to the family was now talking about our shared future. If you believe a mother's love should be sacred, regardless of bank accounts or inheritances, please leave a like. Because what I'm about to do next What I'm about to show her about the true value of conditional love. It's going to change everything. And I can't wait for her to see exactly what her kind of family love is really worth. I never thought I'd be sitting here, confessing how 15 years of devotion crumbled in a single afternoon. But here I am. Let me take you back to where this all started. I was 23 when I married her son, young and hopeful, believing that love could conquer anything. I came from a simple family. My parents worked honest jobs, we lived modestly, and I was raised to respect my elders and treat everyone with kindness. When I first met her, I brought homemade cookies and flowers from our small garden. I remember how she looked at them like they were contaminated, how she barely acknowledged my greeting. The cookies sat untouched on her pristine granite countertop, while she gave me a tour of her immaculate home, pointing out every expensive piece like she was marking territory. But I thought she just needed time to warm up to me. I spent the next month studying her like a devoted student. I learned that she preferred Earl Grey tea with exactly 1 sugar cube, that she liked her morning newspaper folded in thirds and placed to the right of her coffee cup. I memorized her favorite recipes, the way she creamed butter for her famous pound cake, how she insisted on hand-kneading her dinner rolls. Every Sunday dinner became my mission. I'd arrive 2 hours early, my hands already stained from preparing side dishes at home. I'd watch her elegant fingers arrange flowers, while mine were rough from my weekend job at the hardware store. She never asked me to help, but I'd quietly start washing dishes, organizing her spice rack, folding the cloth napkins the way she liked them. "You don't have to do that," she'd say, but her tone suggested I absolutely did have to do that. I gave up my college dreams to work 2 jobs so my husband could finish his degree. While he studied in the evenings, I was stocking shelves at the grocery store or cleaning office buildings downtown. My hands grew calloused, my back ached constantly, but I told myself this was temporary. This was love. This was building a foundation for our future. Every penny I earned, every weekend I worked double shifts, every sacrifice I made, I did it believing I was building something beautiful with this family. She never acknowledged these sacrifices. Instead, she'd make little comments. "Oh, you're working retail again this weekend? How quaint." Or when I'd arrive at family gatherings still in my work uniform because I'd rushed straight from my shift. "Couldn't you have found time to change, dear?" I started keeping a change of clothes in my car. The holidays were the worst. I'd spend my entire paycheck on thoughtful gifts, a silk scarf I'd seen her admire, a first edition book by her favorite author. She'd unwrap them with this polite smile that never reached her eyes, then set them aside like afterthoughts. Meanwhile, she'd shower her other daughter-in-law with praise. "Look at this beautiful sweater she bought me. And she's taking cooking classes at the Culinary Institute?" Never mind that the other daughter-in-law's parents were paying for those classes, that she'd never worked a day in her privileged life. But I kept trying. I learned to sew so I could mend her favorite tablecloth when it tore. I researched her family history and created a photo album for her birthday. I even took a part-time job at a flower shop just so I could bring her the freshest bouquets every week. "You really don't need to keep bringing those," she'd say, already reaching for a vase. "But I suppose they'll do." "They'll do?" Those words echoed in my head for years. When my husband graduated and got his first real job, I thought maybe things would change. Maybe she'd see that our struggles had been worth it, that we'd built something solid together. But instead, she seemed to credit his success entirely to his own merit, as if my years of support had been invisible. "I always knew he'd make something of himself," she'd tell her friends. "He has such drive, such ambition." I was standing right there, wearing the same dress I'd owned for 3 years because we were still paying off his student loans. The breaking point came during our 5th anniversary dinner. We were at her house, and she was telling the story of how her son had pulled himself up by his bootstraps to everyone at the table. I felt something crack inside my chest as she painted this picture of his independent success. "Actually," I said quietly, "I worked 2 jobs so he could focus on his studies." The table went silent. She looked at me with this expression, like I'd committed some terrible social crime by speaking up. "Well," she said finally, "I'm sure you did what you could to help." What I could to help, as if my 60-hour work weeks had been some minor contribution. That night, lying in bed, I realized I'd been living for her approval for 5 years. 5 years of trying to prove I was worthy of her son, worthy of this family. And I was exhausted, but I didn't give up. I couldn't, because somewhere deep down, I still believed that if I just tried hard enough, if I just proved myself valuable enough, she'd finally see me as family. I started taking on more responsibilities. When she mentioned her garden was becoming too much work, I spent every Saturday tending to her roses. When she complained about her aging computer, I taught myself basic tech support so I could help her. When she needed someone to drive her to medical appointments, I rearranged my work schedule without being asked. For 10 more years, I bent myself into impossible shapes trying to fit into her vision of an acceptable daughter-in-law. 10 more years of helpful suggestions about my hair, my clothes, my career choices. 10 more years of watching her light up when her other son's family visited, while treating my presence like an obligation. I became an expert at reading her moods, anticipating her needs, making myself useful in ways that couldn't be criticized. I was the perfect supporting character in her family story, always there, never quite belonging. Until 3 months ago, when everything changed. My grandmother passed away, the same grandmother who had raised me to be kind, to be humble, to put family first. The woman who had taught me that love wasn't about what you could get, but what you could give. I was devastated by her loss, but I had no idea that her death would reveal just how hollow my marriage had become, and how shallow my mother-in-law's love really was. I never thought someone could make you feel so small with just words. Until I met my mother-in-law. The first time it happened, I convinced myself I'd misheard her. We were in her pristine kitchen, and I'd brought homemade cookies. The same recipe my grandmother had taught me. I was so nervous, wanting to make a good impression. But when I handed her the plate, she barely glanced at them before setting them aside. "Store-bought would have been fine, dear," she said with that tight smile. "I know not everyone has time to learn proper baking." My husband just laughed it off later. "That's just how she is," he said. "She doesn't mean anything by it." But I knew she meant every word. The mask didn't slip gradually. It was ripped off completely during my first Christmas with the family. We were all gathered in the living room, extended family members everywhere, when she stood up during dinner and announced, "I don't know what my son sees in her. She's worthless, can't even make a proper roast." The room went silent. My husband just stared at his plate, but she wasn't done. "She's useless around the house, has no education, no class, no family worth mentioning. I keep hoping he'll come to his senses and find someone more suitable." I felt every eye in that room on me, saw the pity, the embarrassment. My hands were shaking as I held my fork, but I said nothing. That's when I learned her favorite weapon wasn't just words, it was public humiliation. From that day forward, every family gathering became her stage, and I became her target. She would wait until there were witnesses, then deliver her cruelest observations about my clothes, my cooking, my inability to give her grandchildren quickly enough, my peasant background, as she called it. I started dreading holidays, dreading birthdays, dreading any occasion that required me to be in the same room with her. But somehow I kept trying. I kept believing that if I just worked harder, sacrificed more, proved myself worthy, she'd finally accept me. I gave up my college dreams. When my husband needed support through medical school, I worked double shifts at the diner and cleaned offices at night. My hands were raw from scrubbing floors, my back ached constantly, but I told myself it was temporary. That once he graduated, once we were more established, she'd see my worth. Instead, she found new ways to tear me down. "Look at your hands," she'd say at family dinners, loud enough for everyone to hear. "So rough and calloused." That's what happens when you don't plan for your future properly. I started wearing gloves to hide them. When I couldn't afford the expensive gifts she expected, she'd open them in front of everyone and make little disappointed sounds. "Oh, how thoughtful," she'd say, holding up the simple scarf I'd saved for weeks to buy her. Meanwhile, she'd gush over the expensive jewelry her other daughter-in-law could afford. "Now this," she'd announce, "shows real taste and consideration." I worked myself to exhaustion trying to keep up. I took on extra cleaning jobs to afford better gifts. I spent my only day off each week cooking elaborate meals for family gatherings, always hoping she'd finally say something kind, but the cruelty just escalated. She started commenting on my weight. "You're looking a bit thick around the middle, dear. My son deserves a wife who takes care of herself." She criticized my hair, my makeup, my clothes. Nothing was ever right, nothing was ever enough. The worst part, my husband's silence. Every time she'd humiliate me, I'd look to him for support, for defense, but he'd just change the subject or make excuses for her later. "She's from a different generation," he'd say. "She doesn't understand how hurtful she sounds." But I saw the calculation in her eyes. I saw how she'd wait for the perfect moment to strike. This wasn't generational misunderstanding. This was deliberate cruelty. 15 years. 15 years I spent trying to earn her love, her respect, her basic human decency. 15 years of working multiple jobs while she lived comfortably in her big house. 15 years of swallowing my pride, my dreams, my self-worth. All for someone who saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience in her son's life. I remember the day I finally understood how deep her contempt ran. We were at a family barbecue, and I was helping serve food when I accidentally bumped into her. She spun around, eyes flashing with genuine hatred. "Clumsy as always," she hissed under her breath, quiet enough that only I could hear. I don't know why he settled for someone so beneath us. That word, settled, cut deeper than all the others combined. Because that's what she truly believed, that I was something to be endured, not embraced. That my love for her son was somehow an imposition rather than a gift. I started having nightmares about family gatherings. I'd wake up in cold sweats, replaying her words, her looks of disgust, the way she'd purse her lips whenever I spoke. The stress was eating me alive, but I couldn't bring myself to stop trying. She had this way of making me feel grateful for the smallest moments when she wasn't actively cruel. Like when she'd simply ignore me instead of insulting me, I'd actually feel relieved. That's how twisted it had become. I was grateful for her indifference. But even in my darkest moments, scrubbing floors at midnight to afford her expectations, I held on to one secret hope. My grandmother had always told me that kindness would be rewarded, that good things came to those who persevered with grace. I had no idea how right she was, or how wrong my mother-in-law was about everything. Have you ever been betrayed by family? Tell me in the comments. I never thought a single letter could shatter what little strength I had left. I was folding laundry in the basement. Her laundry, because somehow over 15 years it had become my job to wash and fold clothes for a woman who couldn't stand the sight of me. The basement was quiet except for the hum of the dryer, and I was moving on autopilot, creasing her blouses the exact way she'd taught me years ago. That's when I saw it. A letter had fallen from one of her sweater pockets, my name written in her careful script across the envelope. I shouldn't have opened it. I knew I shouldn't have. But after 15 years of wondering what I'd done wrong, what made me so unlovable to this woman? I couldn't help myself. "That worthless wife of yours," it began, "will never be anything more than a burden. You deserve so much better than someone so useless and common." I sank to the concrete floor right there, surrounded by piles of her clothes, holding this letter that confirmed every fear I'd carried for 15 years. She really did see me as nothing. The memories came flooding back then, a parade of humiliation I'd tried so hard to bury. That first Christmas dinner, when I was 22 and so eager to make a good impression. I'd spent days preparing homemade cookies, the same recipe my grandmother had taught me. I remember walking into that dining room with my plate of carefully decorated cookies, my hands shaking with nervousness. She looked at them, picked one up, took a tiny bite, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Well, I suppose some people just don't have the touch for baking." Then she pushed the plate aside and brought out store-bought cookies instead. I remember standing there, watching 20 relatives reach for her cookies while mine sat untouched, feeling my cheeks burn with shame. My husband squeezed my hand under the table, but he didn't say anything. He never said anything. Then there was my college graduation. Except I never had one. I'd been 3 semesters away from my degree when my husband decided to go back to school for his MBA. We couldn't afford both tuitions, she said. Someone had to be practical. Someone had to sacrifice. And since I was just getting a basic degree anyway, it made sense for me to drop out and work to support his education. I remember sitting in the financial aid office, withdrawing from classes I loved, while she waited in the car outside. "This is what wives do," she told me later. "They support their husband's dreams." I never told her I'd had dreams too. For 5 years, I worked 2 jobs while he went to school. I waited tables at a diner during the day and cleaned offices at night. My hands were always cracked from the cleaning chemicals, my feet always aching. And every family gathering, she'd introduce me as the one who never finished college, like it was some character flaw instead of a sacrifice I'd made for her son. I tried so hard to prove my worth in other ways. I learned to cook her favorite meals, spent weekends tending to her garden, drove her to every doctor's appointment. I bought her thoughtful gifts I couldn't afford, remembered every birthday and anniversary, sent flowers just because. Nothing was ever enough. At my husband's promotion party, she told a room full of his colleagues that he'd succeeded despite having dead weight at home. I excused myself to the bathroom and cried silently in a stall, pressing toilet paper to my eyes so my mascara wouldn't run. When we bought our first house, she walked through every room criticizing my decorating choices. So, basic, she'd say, running her finger along surfaces like she was checking for dust. I suppose not everyone has an eye for style. When I got pneumonia last winter and couldn't make it to Sunday dinner, she told the family I was always finding excuses to avoid spending time with them. Never mind that I'd attended every Sunday dinner for 15 years, even when I was exhausted from working overtime. The worst was probably my birthday 2 years ago. My husband had forgotten completely, came home to find me crying at the kitchen table. When he called his mother to explain why we'd be late to dinner, I heard her laugh through the phone. Well, she said, it's not like she's accomplished anything worth celebrating. Every insult, every dismissal, every moment she made me feel invisible. They all came crashing down on me in that basement, holding that letter. I pulled out the only photo I carried of my grandmother, the woman who'd raised me after my parents died. She was smiling in her garden, wearing the silk scarf I'd given her for her last birthday. My grandmother who told me I was strong and capable and deserving of love. I'm sorry, Grandma, I whispered to her picture, my tears dropping onto the glass. I don't know how to be strong anymore. I'd given up everything trying to earn this woman's approval. My education, my career ambitions, my sense of self-worth. I'd made myself smaller and smaller, hoping that maybe if I took up less space, she'd finally see something valuable in me. But sitting there on that cold basement floor, surrounded by the laundry of someone who despised me, I realized the truth I'd been avoiding for 15 years. She was never going to love me. No matter what I did, no matter how much I sacrificed, no matter how hard I tried, I would always be worthless in her eyes. I folded that letter carefully, put it back in the pocket where I'd found it, and finished folding her clothes with trembling hands. I carried that basket upstairs like I'd done hundreds of times before, but something inside me had broken. I had nothing left to give, nothing left to sacrifice, nothing left to hope for. I was exactly what she'd always said I was: worthless. 3 months ago, everything changed with a phone call I never expected. I was alone in the house, folding laundry in the basement where I always seemed to end up when I needed to think. The phone rang upstairs, and I almost didn't answer it. Unknown number. But something made me climb those stairs and pick up. Is this the granddaughter of a leaner? The voice was professional, kind, a lawyer from across the country, my great-aunt, my grandmother's sister who I'd lost touch with years ago after grandmother passed. She had been quietly successful, the lawyer explained, investing in property and businesses throughout her life. And she'd left everything to me, her only living relative who had, in her words, maintained the family values of kindness and dignity despite facing hardship. I sat on the kitchen floor, staring at the phone long after he hung up. The inheritance was substantial. A house worth $500,000, stock portfolios worth $300,000, jewelry and artwork collected over decades. Enough to change everything. I thought about my grandmother's jewelry box sitting in my bedroom drawer, about the woman who taught me that wealth meant nothing if you lost your soul getting it, about how she used to hold my hands and tell me that kindness was the only currency that mattered. I didn't tell anyone at first. I needed time to process this gift, this unexpected validation that somewhere in my bloodline, someone had seen my worth. The documents came to a post office box I'd opened in secret. I wanted to understand what this meant before anyone else knew, but paperwork has a way of surfacing. My mother-in-law has always been the type to go through mail, to ask probing questions about every phone call, every visitor, every change in routine. She keeps tabs on everyone's business like it's her job. When I started receiving calls from financial advisors, when official-looking envelopes began arriving, when I had to leave the house for meetings with lawyers, she noticed. I came home from the bank last Tuesday to find her sitting at my kitchen table. My kitchen table, in my house. She had a key, of course, she'd insisted on 1 year ago in case of emergencies. But this felt different, predatory. We need to talk, she said, and there was something in her voice I'd never heard before. Not the usual disdain or disappointment, something sharper, hungrier. She'd been through my mail, found the estate documents I'd foolishly left in my purse, read the bank statements showing accounts I'd never had before, seen the property deeds and investment portfolios. So this is why you've been acting different, she said, spreading the papers across the table like evidence in a trial. Sneaking around, taking mysterious phone calls. I thought maybe you were finally having an affair, at least that would show some backbone. But this is interesting. I watched her fingers trace the numbers on the bank statements. The way her eyes lit up when she saw the property values, the stock portfolio summaries, the jewelry appraisals. $500,000 for the house alone, she murmured, almost to herself. And these investments, my goodness. Who knew your grandmother's sister was so successful? The way she said successful made my skin crawl, like she was tasting the word, savoring it. I suppose this changes things, she continued, finally looking at me. But her expression wasn't the usual contempt. It was something worse. Calculation. All these years I thought you were just, well, but it turns out you're quite valuable after all. Valuable, not worthy, not deserving, valuable. Like a piece of property she'd been appraising wrong. That's when I saw it, the shift, the complete transformation of 15 years of established truth. Suddenly, I wasn't the worthless burden who'd trapped her son. I wasn't the pathetic girl who gave up college and worked 2 jobs just to prove I belonged in their family. I wasn't the disappointment who could never do anything right. I was an asset. We should discuss how to handle this windfall, she said, already using we. There are tax implications to consider, investment strategies. And of course, my son's future to think about, our family's future. Our family, after 15 years of making it clear I didn't belong, now I was family again. Now that I had something she wanted. I stood there in my own kitchen, watching this woman who'd spent over a decade systematically destroying my self-worth suddenly see dollar signs where my face used to be. The same woman who called me worthless at that first Christmas dinner, now calculating my net worth with hungry eyes. You know, she said, her voice taking on that fake sweetness she used when she wanted something. I've been thinking we should spend more time together. Maybe I could help you navigate all this. You've never been good with important decisions, but I have experience with substantial assets. Substantial assets, that's what I'd become. Not a person who'd inherited her great-aunt's life savings because she'd maintained family values of kindness and dignity. Not someone whose character had been seen and valued by a dying woman, just numbers on a bank statement. I thought about my grandmother's voice, telling me that true wealth was measured in how you treated people when they couldn't give you anything in return. How she taught me that dignity couldn't be bought or sold. And I realized something had shifted in me too. Not just because of the money, though that security meant freedom I'd never imagined, but because of what my great-aunt had written in her letter. That someone somewhere had watched me endure 15 years of cruelty and seen strength instead of weakness, had seen worthiness that had nothing to do with bank accounts. My mother-in-law was still talking, planning, calculating our future, but I wasn't listening anymore. For the first time in 15 years, I was hearing something else entirely. My own voice. I wonder where my voice is reaching tonight. If you're listening from somewhere far from here, tell me your city and country below. Sometimes knowing we're not alone makes all the difference. The transformation was immediate and nauseating. One day I was worthless, the next I was sweetie and my dear daughter-in-law. The woman who had spent 15 years treating me like dirt under her shoe was suddenly calling me twice a week just to chat. It started small. A phone call asking how my day went. A text message with a heart emoji. She began inviting me to lunch at places she'd never taken me before. Expensive places where she insisted on paying while making comments about how we girls need to stick together. I watched her, studied her like she'd studied me all these years, looking for weaknesses. Every smile felt calculated. Every hug lasted just a beat too long, like she was performing for an invisible audience. The woman who hadn't hugged me in 15 years was suddenly putting her arm around me at family gatherings, introducing me as my wonderful daughter-in-law to people who had witnessed years of her cruelty. The same relatives who had sat silently while she humiliated me were now seeing this Oscar-worthy performance of maternal affection. She started buying me small gifts. A silk scarf that probably cost more than I used to make in a week. Expensive hand cream that she rubbed into my hands while cooing about how hard I worked. Each gift felt like a tiny bribe, a down payment on something she wanted. But it was the comments about money that really gave her away. We should think about investing wisely, she'd say over coffee, leaning in conspiratorially. Family money should stay in the family, don't you think? Or, I've been thinking about that beautiful house you inherited. Such a responsibility for someone so young. Maybe you'd like some guidance on managing such substantial assets. She'd found my bank statements, my investment portfolios, my property deeds. I caught her going through my purse one afternoon when I came back from the bathroom at her house. She jumped like a guilty child, all flustered apologies and nervous laughter. That's when I knew. This wasn't a miraculous change of heart. This was greed wearing a grandmother's mask. The final straw came during the annual family barbecue at my brother-in-law's house. The same gathering where, just last year, she'd made a joke about how I couldn't even make decent potato salad, while everyone laughed uncomfortably. Now she was hovering around me like a bee around honey, refilling my drink, adjusting my chair, telling anyone who'd listen about how blessed our family is, and how some people just have a golden touch. I watched her performance for 2 hours, watched her touch my shoulder possessively when talking to others, watched her beam with pride when someone complimented the earrings I was wearing. Earrings from my grandmother's collection that she kept calling family heirlooms. Family heirlooms? From a family she'd spent 15 years telling me I didn't belong to? Something inside me snapped, not with rage but with clarity. Cold, clean clarity. I stood up in the middle of her story about our investment strategies and tapped my fork against my glass. The yard went quiet, conversations trailing off as faces turned toward me. I need everyone to hear something, I said, my voice steady and calm. My husband shot me a warning look, but I ignored it. My mother-in-law's smile froze on her face, her hand still possessively gripping my shoulder. 3 months ago, I continued, looking around at all the familiar faces, I inherited a substantial amount of money from my great-aunt. A house worth $500,000, stocks worth $300,000, jewelry that's been in her family for generations. The yard was dead silent now. Even the kids had stopped playing. And 3 months ago, I said, gently removing my mother-in-law's hand from my shoulder, the woman who has called me worthless and useless for 15 years suddenly decided I was worth loving. I watched her face turn pale, watched her mouth open and close like a fish gasping for air. I want everyone to see how quickly someone's value can change when you think they have something you want. I looked directly at her, holding her gaze. I want you all to witness what real love looks like versus what greed disguised as love looks like. The silence stretched like a taut wire. Someone's beer bottle clinked against a table. A dog barked in the distance. For 15 years, I gave everything I had to earn your approval, I said to her, my voice never rising above conversational volume. I gave up college. I worked 3 jobs to put your son through school. I made cookies for every family gathering, brought flowers from my garden, ironed your tablecloths, and listened to you tell me I wasn't good enough. Tears were starting in her eyes now, but not tears of remorse. Tears of humiliation, of being caught. I found that letter you wrote about me, I continued. The one where you called me a burden and said your son deserved better. I kept it all these years, wondering what I'd done wrong. Wondering why I wasn't worthy of basic human kindness. She was shaking now, her carefully applied makeup starting to streak. But I know now, I was always worthy. The problem was never me. The problem was that you're the kind of person who measures love by bank account balances. I picked up my purse, my movements deliberate and calm. The woman who loved me enough to leave me her life's work? She saw my worth 15 years ago. She saw it when I was working minimum wage and living paycheck to paycheck. She saw it when I had nothing to offer but kindness and hard work. I looked around at the faces staring at me, some ashamed, some shocked, some nodding in recognition of truths they'd been too comfortable to acknowledge. That's what real love looks like. It doesn't suddenly appear when someone becomes useful to you. For the first time in 15 years, my mother-in-law had no words. No cutting remarks, no dismissive laughter, no cruel observations about my inadequacies. Just silence and the sound of her mask finally slipping off completely. I never thought I'd be sitting in my own kitchen, in my own house, watching the sunrise through windows that actually belong to me. The peace is overwhelming, if I'm being honest. After 15 years of walking on eggshells, of measuring every word and action against someone else's impossible standards, the silence here feels like a gift. The moving boxes are finally unpacked. It took me 3 months to work up the courage to actually buy this place, even with my grandmother's inheritance sitting in the bank. Funny how money doesn't immediately erase years of being told you're worthless. But sitting here now, with my coffee in a mug that no one can criticize me for choosing, I'm starting to remember who I used to be. The garden was what sold me on this house. Small, overgrown, but full of potential. Just like I was, I suppose. I've been planting the same flowers my grandmother taught me to grow when I was little, before I got so busy trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it freely. The roses are already blooming. She would have loved that. My husband visits every weekend. Yes, he chose me over his mother's manipulation, but it wasn't immediate. It took him seeing her true colors at that family barbecue, watching her scramble to explain away 15 years of cruelty once she realized what I'd inherited. The look on his face when she tried to backtrack, claiming she'd always seen my potential. I think that's when he finally understood what I'd been enduring all those years. We're taking things slow. Rebuilding trust takes time, and I needed space to remember who I am when I'm not constantly defending my existence. He's learning to speak up when she starts her old patterns, and I'm learning that I don't need anyone's permission to take up space in this world. The jewelry box sits on my dresser now, right where I can see it every morning. Sometimes I open it just to touch the pieces my grandmother left me, not because they're valuable, though they are, but because they remind me of hands that held mine with genuine love. Real love doesn't come with conditions. It doesn't wait for bank statements to show respect. She still calls my mother-in-law. Her voice drips honey now, asking about my beautiful new home and wondering if I need any help managing my windfall. She's suggested family investment opportunities, hinted about shared vacation homes, even offered to help me learn to handle such responsibility. I listen politely, say thank you for the concern, and then I hang up. The other day, she showed up unannounced with homemade cookies, the same recipe I used to beg her to teach me, the one she said was family only. She sat in my living room, complimenting my decorating choices, asking if I was happy. For a moment, just a moment, I almost believed she meant it. Then I noticed her eyes cataloging my furniture, probably calculating its worth. I offered her tea, because that's who I am, someone who shows kindness even to people who haven't earned it. But I didn't apologize for my success. I didn't minimize my inheritance or act like I didn't deserve it. That's growth, I think. The truth is, the money didn't make me valuable. It just revealed who had been too blind to see my worth all along. For 15 years, I believed her assessment of me because she said it with such conviction. I gave up college, worked multiple jobs, sacrificed my dreams to prove I was worthy of basic human decency. I measured my worth by her approval ratings, and she kept moving the goalposts. But my grandmother saw me. Really saw me, not just in her will, but in life. She saw the girl who brought her flowers from the garden, who listened to her stories, who called every Sunday not because I had to, but because I wanted to. She saw someone worth loving without conditions, worth investing in without guarantees. I keep her last letter in the kitchen drawer, the one that came with the inheritance documents. She wrote about how proud she was of the woman I'd become, how my kindness in the face of adversity showed my true character. She said she hoped the inheritance would give me the freedom to live authentically, without having to earn love through service. Reading that letter was like exhaling after holding my breath for 15 years. Now I volunteer at the local community center, teaching kids to garden. Their faces light up when they see their first seedlings breaking through the soil, and I remember that feeling of pure, uncomplicated joy. I'm rediscovering parts of myself that got buried under years of criticism and conditional acceptance. The house next door has a "for sale" sign, and sometimes I imagine what kind of neighbor I want to be. The kind who brings soup when someone's sick, who waters plants when they're away, who sees people for who they are rather than what they can provide. The kind of person my grandmother raised me to be. If you're listening to this and someone in your life makes you feel worthless, please hear me. Their blindness to your worth says everything about them and nothing about you. Real love doesn't come with price tags. Real family doesn't wait for inheritance papers to show you respect. You don't need to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. You don't need to earn basic human decency through perfect performance. Your value isn't determined by someone else's opinion, no matter how loudly or confidently they express it. I wish I could tell my younger self that the approval I was chasing was never really available. That some people are so committed to their narrative about you that they'll ignore evidence to the contrary for decades. But I can tell you, when you stop performing for people who were never really watching, you finally have energy to build something beautiful. The sunrise is almost complete now, painting my kitchen walls gold. In a few hours, I'll put on my gardening gloves and tend to my roses. Tonight, my husband is coming for dinner, not because his mother expects it, but because we're choosing each other. And tomorrow I'll wake up in my own house, drink coffee from my own mug, and remember that I was always worthy of love. The inheritance just gave me the space to remember it. If this story touched you, Subscribe to Silent Confessions for more stories of people finding their voice and reclaiming their worth. Because everyone deserves to know they matter, inheritance or not.